In Kansas, too many children still struggle to read at grade level. But the story isn't just about struggling students. It's about the systems, the programs, and the leaders shaping how reading is taught. I'm Jesica Glover, and this is My Child Can't Read, a Heartland Crisis, a documentary-style podcast about how students are left behind and what can be done to help them. In this season, called The Anatomy of Change, we take a look inside teacher preparation programs, classrooms, and among state-level leaders directing the future of literacy in Kansas. We talk with educators, parents, and experts about what works, from evidence-based curriculum and teacher training to coaching and assessment. You'll hear stories of students who found their footing when instruction finally matched the science of reading, and the systemic barriers that still hold too many kids back. Change isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it is happening in Kansas and across the nation. And in this season, we'll show you how, why, and who is leading the charge. This is a story about systems, science, and people refusing to accept failure as the status quo. Because all our kids deserve to read, understand, and thrive right here in the Heartland. Reading is not natural. Unlike speaking, our brains weren't wired to read words on a page. But the good news? Neuroscience has shown us exactly how the brain learns to read and why certain methods work better than others. Today, we're diving into the brain to understand the science behind how we learn to read and why the science of reading isn't just a buzzword. It's biology, it's cognition, and it's essential. Reading is not a natural process. Let's start with something most people don't know. Humans weren't born to read. Spoken language is instinctive. Children pick it up just by being exposed to it. But reading, that has to be taught. Why? Because there's no part of the brain that evolved specifically for reading. Instead, we repurpose parts of the brain designed for other functions: vision, language, memory, and connect them through instruction. Cognitive neuroscientist Stanislas Dehaene and his colleagues have shown that a specific area of the brain, the visual word form area, is consistently involved in reading. They found that in literate people, this area becomes specialized for processing letters and words. In illiterate people, however, the same brain region responds to faces and other objects. Dehaene says, "We have to recycle ancient brain circuits that evolved for object recognition, face recognition, and language. Reading rewires the brain." His conclusion? In learning to read, the brain reallocates part of its ventral visual pathway, a region originally used for recognizing faces and objects, to instead recognize letters and words.
I'm David Herford, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Reading here at Pittsburgh State University within the Division of Research and Economic Development, or RED. And, the story about how I got into dyslexia is kind of an interesting one. I always wanted to be a scientist. So one of the courses that we had to take was the psychology of learning disabilities. And from that moment on, I was interested in doing work with reading disabilities and dyslexia. We were trying to figure out why kids who were poor readers and why kids who were good readers. We were focusing on the language piece, and we found there were differences between kids who were good and poor readers in terms of speech and speech processing, And then we developed some interventions to see if we can improve those skills, which we could. Acquiring language is, for nearly every child, a fairly natural process. It's, firmware that's we're born with in our brain, that all we have to do is be plucked down into a language environment, and then we acquire the language. And notice I'm using the word acquire the language. I'm not saying learning the language, because learning is a process. It's firmware that's in there waiting to be used, and that's true for about the first 6 years of a person's life. If they don't hear language for the first 6 years of their life, then they're going to really struggle to acquire language. But the problem is the individuals who were coming up with these notions of, hey, let's get kids to acquire reading skills like we do with language. The problem is reading isn't firmware that's in our brain.
Right.
And neuroscientists refer to, learning how to read as neurological recycling, which means we're using part of the brain that was built for something else for learning how to read. And so with reading, it takes a lot of effort. And so if we think of teaching reading in a similar vein as acquiring language, that all we have to do is expose them in rich literature and have them, people read books to them and show them books. And when they start reading, if they get to a word they don't know, just guess what the word is based on the picture, or what the last couple of sentences we're talking about, maybe that's the word, or, try to decode the first part of the word and just guess the rest. And in 1960s, a guy named Ted Goodman called that the psycholinguistic guessing game. And we know, based on science, it's absolutely the opposite way to teach reading.
Yeah.
And the analogy is, you want to learn how to read sheet music with piano. And your piano teacher puts, the sheet music on the stand or whatever on the piano and says, hey, just guess at the notes. You're never going to learn how to play piano.
Right. Yeah.
And so we know that roughly 20% of kids likely have dyslexia, which is more of a neurologically based challenge for them to learn how to read. But that's another 20 to 25% of kids who could read if we provided them with the correct instruction. Which we have to teach that reading is a code, that the written language is a code. Learning to read is taking the graphemic form of that language and mapping it on the spoken language.
When I finally learned the science of reading myself, it hit me. Kids weren't struggling to learn to read because they were poor or because they weren't smart enough. They were struggling because teachers didn't have the skill to teach reading to all children.
The reading circuit. So what exactly happens in the brain when a child learns to read? There are 3 key areas involved. 1, the visual word form area helps recognize letters and written words. 2, the phonological processor connects written symbols to sounds. 3, the language comprehension system helps us make meaning from what we read. When instruction is effective, when it includes explicit systematic phonics, these parts of the brain light up in sync. But when instruction skips those steps or emphasizes guessing, the brain struggles to form those connections.
So here's where we get into the specifics. How do kids learn to read? Phonological and phonemic awareness. The words we hear coming by our ear are composed of sounds embedded in the speech stream. Here's the deal. We never hear the sounds when we're speaking. They are embedded in our running speech. The kids never hear the sounds. Some kids from homes that really practice rhyming, uppy-dubby, just regular kid games using language, somehow their brain begins to form circuits which can tear apart the sounds that are hidden in the language. But, most don't hear the sounds coming in the words by our ear. And that may not be a big deal, but those teeny sounds are what have to map onto letters. That's called the alphabetic principle. In other words, kids have to know there's an internal set of sounds that they can pull out when they're reading, so they see a particular letter shape and they slap the appropriate sound on top of it. That's phonemic awareness. Understanding that the words we hear are composed of smaller constituent sounds, and the brain can pull those apart. How does the brain pull them apart? By teaching activities that are direct and systematic, because there's no clarity there. You can't hear the sounds. Play with me, okay? Give me a word that rhymes with big. Pig. Good girl. How did she do it? How do you do that when she can't hear the sounds? How can she slice off a sound when she can't hear them? She had to slice, I said big, she had to slice off the b and replace it with a p, when the brain really doesn't hear those sounds orally. But she's had practice in doing kinds of things where she splits words up. That's phonemic awareness, the ability to understand that the words you hear are hidden, and you have to teach it directly for kids who don't have the experience or they're dyslexic. Dyslexic youngsters come into this world with some difficulties in particular areas of the brain. Can they be taught? Yes. Takes longer. Takes a lot longer. And just as a piece of general information, the more severe difficulties the kids are showing us, the more intense the instruction has to be and the longer it has to be. So this is where master teachers come in. This is where coaches come in. So when you see these slow and labored kids, when you saw Austin, he wasn't able initially to understand that the words that are written on the page have individual sounds inside of them. That's why he was not applying the sounds to the letters. Very labored, halting, hesitant. That's why. And so as the teachers here worked with Austin, they began to represent what those sounds were. They use all kind of manipulatives. So then you see him 2 years later. The sounds are placed upon the letters quickly, almost unconsciously, and the kid is reading the words quickly. So how in the world can you comprehend, understand what you're reading, which is the goal of reading, if you're so slow and labored? I don't know about you, but if I'm reading like that, I don't remember when I get to the end of the story. I don't comprehend. That's why the NAEP scores suck. Excuse the scientific term. Because it's more of a comprehension test, which it should be. It's 4th grade. But they're not going to comprehend if they don't pull the print off the page.
The following quote is widely attributed to Dr. Marianne Wolf, an expert in reading and literacy, the current director of the new Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice at the UCLA School of Education and Information Studies, and an author of many books, including Reader Come Home. She says, if children don't learn to connect letters to sounds, they don't activate the full reading circuit. They rely on compensatory strategies, like memorizing words or guessing. This statement emphasizes the importance of phonics in reading development, noting that a lack of connection between letters and sounds hinders the brain's full reading circuit.
Okay, one more thing. All right. You're looking at a youngster coming into the 1st grade who's at risk for reading failure. This is Jack Fletcher's work and myself and Andy Papanicolaou. If you'll notice the left hemisphere, contrast it with bottom left. The at-risk reader has a very difficult time with language, particularly the linguistic gymnastics with rhyming and so forth and so on. And you can see the typical signature that we see is that there's overactivation in the right hemisphere, which right hemisphere wasn't built to tear apart sounds and work with language. But the reader is really trying to compensate. And you'll see the difference with the typical reader coming along and very little activation on the right. You got to stay with me here. Notice the right hemisphere. Notice the activation signature. You see it? Notice the left hemisphere, and that's the home for language and reading and stuff like that. You see how diminished it is? It's like that first at-risk kids. The point I want to make is difficulties learning to read have much less activation in the left hemisphere than the normal kids do. After intervention with structured literacy, notice the change. Diminishing right hemisphere signature, which we want to see. Increased activity in the left hemisphere. Make sense? And it's very predictable. We've imaged, quite a few kids. So we can do this. I promise you, we can do this.
What Dr. Lyon just described, that powerful shift in the brain when structured literacy is used, isn't just theory. We've seen it happen in classrooms across the country. But for years, many educators were unknowingly using methods that bypassed this very reading circuit. That's exactly what former superintendent, now director of the Kansas Literacy Blueprint, Cindy Lane realized after decades of doing everything the system told her to do. This is why the 3 cueing system, a method that encourages students to guess words using pictures or context, is so harmful. It builds bad habits and bypasses the brain's core reading network. And for Cindy, that realization was personal. She'd led districts, trained teachers, and believed deeply in her students. But when she saw the reading data, something didn't add up. Here's how she describes that turning point.
And it's just an honor to be here with you today, Jessica. My name is Cynthia Lane, but most people know me as Cindy. And I am probably 40 plus educator in Kansas, where I've spent all my career. My current role is as the director of the Blueprint for Literacy, shorthand director of literacy for the Kansas Board of Regents. Yeah. But most of my career was in special education. Frankly, most of it was in leadership in special education. And then for the first 25 years, and then the last half of my career was in education administration. I was actually a superintendent of schools for Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools, and retired from that 7 years ago, but haven't been able to sit still. So had the opportunity to be hired by K-Board to do this work in literacy, and I jumped right in.
Wow. You have had your hands in lots of different areas doing lots of important work. That's incredible.
In my early literacy journey, I thought you were supposed to memorize words because I was taught with, I think, what would be called a whole word approach, but it really was a lot of flashcards and memorization, and that's not how my brain worked. So I didn't learn to read till I was in 7th grade.
Okay.
An educator sat down with me. I mean, I could call words, sort of, but finally an educator sat down with me and said, you can do this, and showed me the secret code of phonics and how things came together, and I began to build confidence and was able to figure it out. So in everything that I've done in my career, it's always been from the lens of not underestimating people's capacity and to find best way forward of how individuals learn and to make sure that we support our kids. when I was superintendent in 2010.
Okay.
And we were all in balanced literacy. And we were flying people all over the country and engaging with all of those authors and all of that. And I could see major transformation happening in what was going on in our classrooms. Mm-hmm. You could walk in and see kids appear to be highly engaged in the work, and they were writing more, and we were doing small group instruction and guided reading, and we were doing some phonics instruction, but we were also doing 3Qing because that was part of it, right? Mm-hmm. And I kept looking at our data thinking, why is this data not getting better? Why are we still we're doing everything that the research is telling us is necessary? And so I retired back in 2018. And right after that, Emily Hanford's
Sold a Story came out.
Yeah. And I was listening, and I just started screaming at the top of my lungs. I was so mad that we had missed it. I am a person who struggled to learn to read.
Yeah.
And I didn't see through the smoke and mirrors of balanced literacy. And I had our whole system focused on that. I mean, when I say whole system, I mean pre-K through high school. Mm-hmm. Was engaged in literacy. Every school had a literacy plan. We were all these resources, leveled books, classroom libraries, training. I was sold a story. Unfortunately, my teachers and my kids and my families were sold a story. So thankfully, my former district has pivoted and their teachers have all been letters trained. And now we know. So the moral of that story is know better, do better.
Yeah.
And so part of that experience that I had is probably why I'm so passionate about being engaged in helping to solve, because I know when educators have the right tools, training, and resources, they do remarkable things. And when our families have support, we can teach all kids to read.
What the research shows. For decades, researchers have used fMRI scans to compare the brains of skilled and struggling readers. The difference? Activation of the left hemisphere reading circuit, as Dr. Reed mentioned earlier in this episode. A 2014 study at MIT found that poor readers showed underactivation in the brain's phonological processing area. But when given structured phonics-based instruction, those areas improved. The conclusion? Struggling readers can rewire their brains if they get the right instruction. But it's not just about phonics. The science of reading includes all the pillars identified by the National Reading Panel: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. These work together, and they match what we see in brain scans. The evidence is overwhelming. If you'd like to learn more about how the brain learns to read, join us for our monthly Dyslexia, Let's Talk About It, an engaging lecture with Phillips Fundamental Learning Center founder Janine Phillips. It's offered every third Thursday of the month right here at PFLC. To RSVP, just give us a call at 316-684-7323. We hope to see you there because every child deserves the chance to read.
The most common confusion is that if the alphabet is taught, the teacher thinks that that's phonemic awareness, or if just rhyming and alliteration are taught, that that's enough phonemic awareness. So a lot of children can come to using letters without fully understanding the alphabetic principle, what those letters do. And until we spend time making sure that the children are attaching those letters to these speech sounds in words, the phonics instruction doesn't work very well. I just saw a first grade teacher in the hall who had started with us the first year, and he said, "Dr. Moats, of course all of my children are reading, and I want you to come by and see this." This was the same teacher who, on the first day of our workshops 4 years ago, was in tears because he was so unhappy that he had failed his children the other years that he had taught. And he said poignantly to me, "If someone had taught me how to do this, I would not have lost all those children who were passed on without being able to read."
Why this science isn't in every classroom. So here's the million-dollar question. If we know how the brain learns to read, why aren't we teaching kids that way? The answer is complex, but here's part of it. Many teacher prep programs don't teach reading science. Publishers sold programs built on outdated methods, and schools often prioritize balanced literacy, a feel-good approach that includes phonics and theory, but often lacks real structure or sequence.
I just knew something was off, but every time I asked, they told me that it's normal and he'll catch up, or lots of kids mix up their B's and D's.
We've built a system that ignores what the brain tells us, and it's costing kids their confidence and their future. If we know how the brain learns to read, why do you think so many schools are still not teaching this way?
I think it's interesting that we work in a field where learning is the goal, and yet we seem resistant to searching out and reading research ourselves overall. I think we know change is hard for any of us, but it does take humility to say we were wrong. And it's super uncomfortable to acknowledge that we've failed a lot of kids. We've moved kids through systems that never became proficient, fluent, comprehending readers. So I'm not entirely sure, but I do believe leadership has to get retrained themselves. They have to seek out, find a few people who are willing to join them. And then we got to put the pressure on the fact that we will only make decisions and take feedback from those who are immersed in science and research. So for me, ignoring science, ignoring research, ignoring the evidence from that research, and continuing our former practices is nothing short of negligence.
From your perspective, Diane, how much of the problem comes back to how teachers are prepared in college or not prepared to teach reading with the science in mind?
I do think it's important that our colleges establish at least a hook in these young people's minds of how we need to be teaching science of reading and what we need to do to produce fluent, comprehending readers. But I am confident if public education themselves will embrace this, they will move their systems where they need to be. I can bring in a graduate and we can teach them, because I would expect everybody on my staff is that they know this, that they're passionate about it. And just like everything from college, I mean, I was writing 5-page lesson plans. That's not practical. That's not how it actually happens in the classroom. So I think college's job is to maybe provide the framework or the theory, and then we're boots on the ground and we're going to show you how to teach structured literacy day in, day out. We're going to show you how to intervene for kids. We're going to show you how to read the data and become literate in knowing what kids need for their next step in the reading journey.
Big publishing companies continue to sell programs built on outdated methods. What keeps districts tied to those programs instead of making a shift like Skyline?
Well, this won't be a popular response because we're making decisions for the adults. We're not making decisions for kids. Yeah. And we think that we want a pretty curriculum, or we want an easy to implement curriculum, or honestly, adults' mindsets that teaching phonics, doing structured literacy might be boring for a kid. It's not boring for a kid. It's a lot of repetition. It's a lot of making sure they have it before we move on. But learning is fun and engaging for kids. It's an adult problem that we think it's not flashy enough. We want something that's not boring. Cost of new curriculum, tossing out what we've done before is hard, and we may not be confident in what we're looking for in curriculum also. That's why it's super important in leadership, and you have at least a small team at the beginning stages that are willing to do the work that it takes to know this stuff. But I mean, we were at a point here where, I literally told people to take them out, burn them, like throw them in the dumpster. I did not want to walk into a classroom ever again and see any curriculum that does not align with research.
Hope through science. But here's the hope. When schools use structured literacy, the brain responds. When teachers are trained in the science of reading, student outcomes improve.
I went in to see Miss Connie the summer after kindergarten, and she diagnosed me with dyslexia. And at first I was nervous because I didn't want to be different, and I thought that I was going to be weird for having dyslexia, and I felt like that was a bad thing. But like the first week of school, I knew that I was in the right place and that I was getting the help I needed.
So good. Okay, so can you tell me a little bit about how the reading instruction was more effective?
Well, the way that they teach it here, which is really a way that you should teach any kid how to read, is just the best way to do it because it teaches it in a way that focuses on mastery rather than speed. So by learning each individual sound, you have a more complete understanding of the English language, and that can obviously be a very good thing for all kids, no matter if you're dyslexic or not. So yeah, that's really just the best way to teach it here.
How has learning the right way for you changed how you see yourself?
I think that it's made me see myself in a much better light because I went from feeling defeated and unintelligent to feeling like I could do anything if I tried hard enough.
And here's the thing. This science doesn't just help kids with dyslexia. It helps every reader.
Once you know this science, you can't go back. Every child deserves the kind of teaching that builds the right brain pathways from the start. When we welcome teachers and parents into our Endale Teacher Literacy Institute to learn structured literacy, you can almost see the relief wash over them. Not only are they finally getting training in how reading really works, but we hear over and over again, "Why didn't anyone tell me this before?"
My oldest son, who was a high performer in school and doing great, hit third grade, and it was like a wall. I mean, he came in, and as that year progressed, he got more anxiety. His self-esteem and self-worth was dropping just right in front of our eyes. And by the end of the first semester, we were having a lot of conversations with the teacher about it. You know, his stomach was hurting. He was sick a lot. He would leave to go to the bathroom a lot. He was get out of his chair and just struggling to find success. And you could just see him cratering inward. And thank God we had the resources of Phillips Fundamental Learning Center to help us, cut to the chase earlier. We always knew dyslexia might be in our family. We'd been looking for it. But the interventions, once we had figured it out at the school that we were at that time, they were not structured literacy interventions. And so then he started doing work that wasn't helping, and it made everything worse for him. And so that's when we educated ourselves and were able to move him over to the Rolfe Literacy Academy, and he was reborn. Fourth and fifth grade he did over here, found his footing again, and launched back into regular middle school kind of practice, and he's been able to be successful. He's learned to advocate for himself, understand what his special gifts are, what's going to be hard for him, and he's navigating through it really, really well. And so I feel like we've seen the miracle in his life. With my younger kids who are dyslexic, we were able to intervene much earlier before we saw that. But as a parent, when you see your kid losing their self-esteem and self-worth, there's not much worse to see because you feel powerless and knowing how to help. Social change like this is slow. It's hard. What's hard about this one is kids get left behind every year. More kids get left behind every year. And so, there has to be impetus on this. If the change is necessary, you can start talking about what change you want to bring to the situation. And generally, people out there believe change is necessary, but they don't have a lot of agreement on what it is. And what I've found, from my position on the Regents trying to bring change, where we could, is that this is a situation where everybody generally wants to blame someone else versus taking their own responsibility. For example, what we had to deal with in higher education was, we had school districts pointing and saying, you're sending us teachers that aren't trained in structured literacy. You're not putting enough emphasis on that. And so we had to sit there and say, okay, well, let's look at our curriculum. How do we need to change it? And this is all part of the blueprint for literacy that we rolled out a couple of years ago.
As business leader and CEO of Thrive Group, John Rolfe has said both in this episode and a previous episode, we all need to get on the same page as to what change we agree to make. We are proposing here that we all get on the bandwagon to instill structured literacy so that all children can achieve literacy, because as school board chair Kathy Hopkins has said, reading is a civil rights issue.
We have to be that passionate because it is a civil rights issue. It is the reality of the basis of society. We have to have literate, and there's no reason they can't be. That's the part that's so huge that we have to understand. We can do the right things. As parents, as educators, all of us, we can know enough and we can help those who are really in the trenches, our educators, to have the tools they need and be able to move this thing, because Kansas can make a difference we can make a difference in our state, and we can make a difference in our nation. We just have to have the desire and the passion and let our hair be on fire so we can just keep going.
Our brains weren't built to read, but we can build the systems that teach kids how. Understanding the brain changes what we ask for. If you want instruction that builds the right neural pathways, ask your school whether your child's classroom uses a science of reading aligned curriculum and whether teachers have structured literacy training. If you're looking for a good book or audiobook to learn more about the research behind how the brain learns to read and tools you can use with dyslexic learners, check out Overcoming Dyslexia, 2nd edition by Dr. Sally Shaywitz. For testing and training resources, Phillips Fundamental Learning Center offers evaluations and teacher courses at funlearn.org. What message do you wish every policymaker, university professor, and school leader could hear right now about why this training matters?
Without explicit literacy knowledge, experience, and practice, you will never know what you never learned to do.
Hi friends, I'm Ann with Phillips Fundamental Learning Center. If you're a Kansas educator who wants to transform how you teach reading, our Structured Literacy Intervention Specialist course is for you. We have multiple offerings that you can select from. Either our 2-week intensive course, which is offered either online or in person. Our next trainings are in October or June. Or we have a 16-week evening course that runs from January to May. And here's the best part. If you're a Kansas educator, we may have a scholarship available for you. I'd love to help talk you through the process. Just email me at achandler@funlearn.org or call 316-684-7323.
Please share this Brain Science Podcast episode with your school board or PTA, because we can't wait for every child to struggle before we act. Next time on Season 2 of My Child Can't Read, A Heartland Crisis, we look at the numbers and what the data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress and Kansas State Assessments reveals about the current reading crisis. Until then, keep learning, keep asking questions, and remember, reading is a right, not a privilege. And every child in the Heartland deserves to be a reader. Thanks for listening to My Child Can't Read, A Heartland Crisis. If today's episode resonated with you, if you saw yourself, your child, or your classroom in these stories, you're not alone. We believe every child can learn to read, and every parent and teacher deserves the knowledge to help them. I invite you to take action today by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode, rate and review to help others find this series, and tell us about your story and discover how the Phillips Fundamental Learning Center is changing lives through literacy at funlearn.org/podcast. That's funlearn.org/podcast. And share this show with a friend, teacher, or fellow parent who needs to hear it. All resources, source credits, and tools mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes. Remember, together we can rewrite the story one reader at a time right here in the Heartland.